So Alexis Brissot is going to give us framework data about concerning electronic cigarettes, and is at the French Observatory on Addictive Trends. And first, we have Marion ADLER. She's a tabacologist, and I work with her. Thank you, Marion. And Anne-Laurence Lefaou. She's used to being with us. And we also have Ivan Montoya, whom Jean-Pierre introduced. He's a professor at NIDA and in charge of the is at an institution on National Institute on Drug Abuse. And Jean-Michel de Lille, I'm not sure he's here. So if he's here, he's welcome. This society debate is one of the two in the symposium. We're going to talk about vaping. Is it a smoking cessation tool? Is it a simple food for reducing risk, or a gateway to nicotine addiction? You know that the ministry, Aurélien Rousseau, have taken a route on this issue. So I'm convinced we're going to have an interesting debate. And I think that the audience will contribute. So we didn't have a chance to prepare that. Maybe Nicolas Bonnet, for 5 minutes, maybe you could start, and then we'll give the floor to each one of you, debate, and then we invite the audience to participate. Thank you, Amine. Thank you for your invitation. Thank you, Jean-Pierre, for your trust in me. I'm happy to be here with you tonight on this issue of nicotine consumption in vaping, vaporizers. This e-cigarette that was created in 2003, 20 years ago. It's recent. It was created by the consumers. It improved with the help of the consumers. They changed it. And today it's a real object for harm reduction. This object was distributed by the consumer, so it's really defined as a community health object before being taken over by the large groups, especially in North America. It's still an object which is deeply inscribed in the community and in harm reduction. So this community approach has different aspects. There are different uses, and we can illustrate that within the groups for consumption not only of nicotine but also of other products like CBD and other cannabinoids or other products that can be consumed in the same way. At the RESPAD, the association I have been managing for a few years, we started working. We had a first conference in 2016, 7 years ago, and many things have happened and have changed. 7 years ago, we had precaution object and for harm reduction. In terms of policy, the debate is the same today, and I don't think there's been a major improvement. But there are recommendations. The last vaping summit, the Ministry of Health, Olivier Véran, was in support of vaping and said it could be introduced into for smoking cessation. It was not the case, and it's very difficult to use it in France as a tool to support smokers and to include it in the products used for smoking cessation. It's the proofs are accumulating. We're going to talk about scientific proofs which show today the relevancy of vaping to stop smoking. It's even better than other treatments, but still we have the impression that it's not moving. With three topics that keep coming back: the place in society, the social regulation with visual nuisance when when you're vaping next to you. What about the regulations? Is it a drug? Is it a large consumer product? A second point for me is the health consequences, the toxicity of the product, with an approach between a precaution principle or risk reduction. It has some toxicity, but much less than cigarettes. And the last aspect is the trajectory with the possible gateway. The debate around is nicotine consumption while vaping. Is it an inducement to become addicted to tobacco? Is it just a type of consumption of nicotine without any relation to tobacco consumption? This is another aspect that is very present. Amine BENYAMINA said it. We're going to have two presentations, one from Alex Brissot, a statistician in the data unit, and Marion ADLER, addictologist at the Antoine Béclair Hospital in Clamart. And she's going to talk about the use of this product. And then we can have a debate with the other speakers. So now we're going to give the floor to Alex Brissot, who is online. Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me. So my name is Alex Brissot. I'm working at the data unit at the French Observatory of Drugs and Addictive Tendencies. I work on investigation of general population. I'm going to talk to you about the data available on the use of the e-cigarette in France. These data come from different investigations in the general population which represent people living in France. Two of these devices in teenagers, in adolescents, by the OFDT, and the third one is among the adult population, and it's by Santé Publique France. The first one among adolescents is a national investigation in high schools on health and substances. It was started in 2018, and it's a mix of two national studies. One is HBSC since 1994, and among students 11 to 15 years of age. And since 1910, it represents all the high school students. The second international investigation is the ESPAD investigation, conducted in France since 1999, and it's for adolescents from 16 years of age, and it's health focused and risk focused. Since 2011, this sample was enlarged to include all adolescents in school in high school. in senior high school. This led to the en classe device, where you address all the students in colleges and private or public high schools to represent all young people in secondary schools. In 2022, there was more than 9,500 students were answered a questionnaire. The second investigation is on the health and consumption investigation. Since 2000, it's for people, young people 17 years of age who are French nationals. They ask about the drug consumption in this adolescent population. We can follow the evolution of the levels of use to identify the emergence of new trends. ESPAD is based on a paper interrogation during the AGDC. The sampling, you approach all the young people that are in AGDC. In 2022, it was in between 21 and 25 of March. More than 23,000 youth answered this questionnaire. The third system is the barometer questionnaires by Public Health France to better know the practices of French citizens in terms of health. This is a telephone investigation with a random telephone numbers. In 2021, it involved 24,000 people between 18 and 85 years of age living in France and speaking French. And this year, it will contact 22,000 individuals. First of all, I will talk about the diffusion of electronic cigarettes among adolescents and among adults. For your information, the results of the en classe investigation are not published yet, but it's important to give you the trends that come out of this investigation. The use of the e-cigarette has been seen, and so we have 10 years. We've worked on it for 10 years. We have 3 indicators to measure the use. First of all, experimentation during life, the use during the previous month, that's recent use, and finally, the daily use of the e-cigarette. These 3 indicators had a drop between 2014 and 17, but there is a sharp rise from 2017 to 2022, and especially in the recent use and daily use. During this period, the recent use doubled from 16.8 to 30.7, and daily use was multiplied by 3 from 1.9 to 6.2%. In 2022, the e-cigarette became the second product most consumed at age 17, before alcohol and after tobacco. However, the part of youth who smoke tobacco daily is more than those that vape user have a daily use of e-cigarettes. In the en classe study in high school, we observed the same 10 trends. The daily use is rising, and experimentation and use during the last 30 days is greater than similar indicators for tobacco. When we observe these evolutions, depending on the sex of the adolescents, there is a sharp rise on the there is a more sharper rise among girls. They have it's 8% less than for boys. However, in 2022, the level of experimentation for girls is only 2% less than for boys, and they consume even more than boys for the past month, 31.8% versus 29.7%. Concerning daily vaping, both sexes have equivalent levels, but this was multiplied by 2 for boys from 2.8 to 6.3. It was multiplied by 6 for girls from 0.9 to 6%. In the on-class investigation, the trends are similar, and regardless of the age, the figures are the same for boys and girls. The Escapade study shows differences. There are 3 categories. The first, the students, and the apprentices, and in the third categories, the youth in another situation, people who are dropouts, or because they're working or they are without a job. There are strong differences depending on the status, where we can see the consumption levels among the 3 groups. The last 2 groups have higher levels. We see that in 2022, more than 7 out of 10 already vaped. And the more frequent the use of e-cigarette, the greater the differences. In 2022, half of the apprentices vaped in the last 30 days for 29.2% of the students, and the apprentices in proportion are twice as many to have a daily use of the e-cigarettes. For the youth that are not in the school system, the level is like those of the apprentices. When we look at the cross-experimentation of tobacco and e-cigarette, we see that between 2017 and 2022, the proportion of 17 years youth is stable, 1 out of 2 young in orange, and in blue you see that the part of adolescents who experienced tobacco was divided by 4, from 18 to 5%. And this is between the non-experimenters of the 2 products. It went from 30 to 38%, and part of it is shown in the consumption of e-cigarette from 4 to 10%. Today, at 17, there's less tobacco consumption. So it's difficult to conclude, to see that people move from tobacco to the e-cigarette, even though most of the experimenters of this product also have a tobacco experience. In the same way, when we look at the daily use of tobacco and e-cigarette, we see that part of the daily tobacco smokers was divided by 2 between 17 and 22, from 24% to 12%. You see that in blue. And this drop is due to the adolescents that have no daily use of tobacco or e-cigarettes, and it went from 74% to 82%. As to the 17 years old who use these 2 products daily, it's increasing, but they go from 1% to 3%, but it's marginal. Finally, among the adult population, the indicators measured are not exactly the same. As for the adolescents, experimentation and daily use is similar, but here you measure daily e-cigarette users and the occasional users, those who say they use e-cigarettes but not on a daily basis. Here you see on the table that between 2020 and 2021, the consumption remains stable. Less than 4 out of 10 students already use a vaporizer. As to daily use, it's increasing from 5.4% to 6.7% and 4.3 to 5%. These levels are less than those for tobacco among adults. In 2021, 35.9% said they smoke tobacco occasionally or daily, and daily tobacco smoking was 25.3%. Men have a higher use than women, regardless of the indicator. For example, in 2021, 35% of women used the product, and 4% use daily cigarettes among women. You see the generational effect for consumption of the e-cigarette. Experimentation of the product drops between 18 and 75 years old. It goes from 63% to 12% for the older adults. For the other uses, it doesn't change significantly between 1825, 2634, and 3544. The part of current use moves from 8.9% to 8.8%, but it decreases later. To summarize all this, it shows there's an increase of the use of e-cigarettes in the last few years among adolescents and adults. And among the adolescents, it's higher among girls who have similar levels, similar to those for boys. At the same time, the use of tobacco has decreased among the adolescents and adults. Among the adolescents, they use e-cigarettes more than tobacco. And as we said, at 17, this decrease doesn't mean that they use more e-cigarettes. The combined use of these two products remains stable. Finally, the school status is a discriminating factor for e-cigarettes, but it's the same for all psychoactive products, alcohol, tobacco, or illicit drugs. So this status is, this can explain the consumption of e-cigarettes, but other factors can be involved, such as a family situation or the environment. And finally, we saw that among adults, there is a generational effects. The younger generation consume more than the older generation. You will find on the OFDT this website, we'll see the preliminary results of this investigation with the uses of electronic cigarettes in high schools. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Alex Brissot. And the speaker is correcting the presenter. It's not Alexis, it's Alex. Thank you very much, Alex Brissot, for this data, some of which have not yet been published. So thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to see them as a first. Those are very important pieces of information which are going to kickstart the discussion in this debate, I would say. Some of the information that you presented are pretty much surprising, I would like to say, but I'm not going to jump to conclusions. Now, if you agree, I would like us to give the floor to the perception that we have to a number of clinicians. So everybody on stage here are going to have an opportunity to start the conversation. So who'd like to start? Well, maybe you're going to give the floor to Marion ADLER. She doesn't need an introduction. She's a specialist in tobacology. At Antoine Beckler as well is the head of she's head of what? Well, thank you very much, Amine. It's always a pleasure to work with you. I'd like to start with the organizers, the scientific committee. They asked me to come here and discuss during this very well-known international colleague. I would like to thank Arthas as well, because he was very patient. He helped me in my organization. And maybe I have a remote control, but hopefully I do, because I was told that I have a remote control that would help me. Never mind. I'm always accused of being in favor of vaping. Now, I'm going to say things as they are. I'm in charge of tobacco cessation, and I'm all in for everything that has to do with patients. Since 1997, I've been active in this industry, so I'm not a newborn in this industry. And I learned as I went, I learned with patients. And so initially I was not in favor, but I realized as I went that it was a very important support for patients, something that we can't do without. And I'm going to tell you with scientific data, I'm going again to try and back what I'm saying with scientific data, how we can go about those things to date. Today, e-cigarette, those are my disclosures. Yeah, the technician are in charge of navigating your presentation. Thank you very much. Okay, am I able to navigate my presentation from the rostrum? Apparently it's about to be the case. Our technician Cyril is going to help, but we wouldn't like him to get hurt in the meantime. Well, that would be very unfortunate. So I'm going to discuss e-cigarette and how it may help in tobacco cessation. So I'm going to present my outline then again. So we see the outline of representation, some scientific data to begin with in order to foster. I'm not going to talk too quickly because I know that there are interpreters, and I thank you very much because it's off to a bad start. You're speaking very fast, but we're going to talk about e-cigarette in pregnant women. In the last 25 years, I've been interested in pregnant women, and I know it's difficult for them to stop smoking, and yet it may be extremely interesting for them to use e-cigarettes. And I'm thinking that we are counterproductive with pregnant women because they hear everything exactly the opposite. I'm also going to discuss a few things in younger population. And with Alex, we've just heard that young people are attracted by maybe cigarette or e-cigarette, but e-cigarette is going to try and be a deterrent against smoking, and I think it's worthwhile. So, of course, e-cigarette, it's not necessarily a way for tobacco cessation, but there are a number of international studies trying to underline the interest. Our British counterparts have groups of scientists, groups of experts that have been active in e-cigarette. As Nicolas BONNET said, for many decades, e-cigarettes are available. It is used since 2010 or 2011 for tobacco cessation, but of course we need to continue and deepen scientific research. So it may be a tool, useful tool for patients, because of course patients are to be helped in stopping smoking, but there still has to be a dimension of pleasure, has to be a pleasurable experience. It's not something that is recognized, especially by healthcare professionals, but of course it's seminal and central if we want patients to continue. The Public Health of England has demonstrated that it is 95% less dangerous than tobacco. So when we compare e-cigarettes and tobacco, e-cigarettes are estimated to be 95% less dangerous than tobacco. So it is not for non-smokers, of course, but as I said, 95% less toxic than tobacco. However, we need to continue and be scientifically backed. We all know that nicotine in tobacco is creating an addiction. And what actually is deleterious for patients is not the lack of smoke, but actually the lack of nicotine. So nicotine is the active ingredient that is going to help with tobacco cessation. And we're going to read that in e-cigarette, there's no tobacco. It's vaporization of nicotine if you use an active ingredient with propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin. There are also a number of aromas. Aromas in France are compliant with ATHS regulations, and those are the regulations that have to be complied with for everything that has to be ingested or any nutrient. So of course there are a lot less toxic substances in an e-cigarette than there is in a regular cigarette. Now, if we look at literature, the high body to scientific knowledge said that there's no scientific proof in the use of e-cigarette in tobacco cessation. Well, I have to disagree. Our UK counterpart, our British counterparts, have presented rather recently a Cochrane study which was published in November 2022, and this study demonstrates very clearly. So Cochrane, as you certainly know, you're very much aware of this, Cochrane is a review exercise where they show that there's an improvement of tobacco cessation thanks to the e-cigarette a lot better than with nicotine substitutes. You know that our British counterparts work very well, and the Public Health England, OHID, they meet on a monthly basis with experts. They discuss on e-cigarettes and they have a look at all published papers. And I really like the way they work because they do in all details. And the report, which was published in 2022, report by 2022, well, what they say is that using an e-cigarette, of course, is not devoid of risks, especially for those who have never smoked before. However, on the short and medium term, using an e-cigarette only represents a small fraction of risks compared to tobacco use. Products that are used in an e-cigarette are the most widely used products for tobacco cessation. This is something that is resorted to by a number of former smokers. And what they also say is that it's very useful for pregnant ladies, a lot better if they were to continue smoking during that pregnancy. Of course, those pregnant women have to be proposed treatment with nicotine substitution if they are not able to stop smoking. An e-cigarette could be an interesting adjunct if they are not successful in stopping cigarette use. And if they are not successful, e-cigarette could be, as I say, an adjunct. This is what they do in the UK. Now, if we look at the Cochrane study that I just mentioned, it was published in November 2022, so that's very recent. There are a scientific proof with a high level of proof, and which says that the use of e-cigarette with nicotine substances that help in tobacco cessation, and it's a lot, of course, it's superior to e-cigarettes using substances without nicotine. So what do we have here? It's an interesting adjunct to tobacco cessation, and so of course maybe the High Council to Public Health in France should of course review their recommendations in the light of this Cochrane research. As you know, I'm deeply interested in the use of tobacco in pregnant women because I see a number of patients coming in and they say, well, I resumed smoking, and yet I stopped smoking thanks to e-cigarette while I was pregnant, but I resumed regular cigarettes because of the recent recommendations. We know that carbon monoxide contained in smoke is reducing facility in male, but also in female. So those ladies, they stopped smoking before being pregnant. They use an e-cigarette while they're pregnant so as not to take up tobacco again. But tobaccologists will recommend pregnant women, well, stop the e-cigarette, do smoke a few cigarettes while you're pregnant. And so what do? Well, they take up smoking again. And so I saw more and more pregnant women coming in and they smoke as pregnant. although they stopped before they got pregnant in the first place. I have a number of interesting papers which demonstrates the safety of e-cigarette during pregnancy. Of course, in first line, we should propose a nicotine substitution drugs, but if needed, we should resort to all adjuncts in order to have them stop tobacco. In a cohort of 1,329 female pregnant in the United States. That's all right. Thank you very much. Yeah, you're a very smart speaker. Thank you very much. So this study is very interesting. It demonstrates that ladies before pregnancy, when they use e-cigarette during their pregnancy to stop tobacco use, they were successful in not smoking during the entire pregnancy, which means that there's less use of tobacco in those women compared with those treated with nicotine substitutes. So what do we have? Well, those ladies using e-cigarette have the highest chance to become abstinent until they deliver. So it demonstrates that e-cigarette is useful and efficient in pregnant women. It comes with risk reduction because we know that risk is mostly associated to carbon dioxide. And we also know that it's also related to the lack of oxygenation, and the lack of oxygenation come with babies with a small birth weight and a number of complications at delivery. We know that if regular cigarettes are replaced by e-cigarettes, we know that they are going to abstain from smoking during the entire pregnancy. However, for those women, we can recommend them to use in first line nicotine substitutes. This is what I recommend during all my consultations. Of course, if this is not successful, if we can prevent them from taking up regular cigarettes again on top of nicotine, as I would say, I would recommend as well to use e-cigarettes. This is a study from a Dublin maternity ward, larger maternity ward, and they conducted a study on safety in order to confirm whether there's a risk in using e-cigarettes during pregnancy. The long and short of this study, a follow-up on the way of birth. We know that a pregnant woman who smokes during her pregnancy is going to deliver a child with a weight which is going to be up to 10% inferior to that of a woman who do not smoke. This is something that we've known for many years. Now, what do we realize with this study, which is extremely interesting? Well, we do see 4 groups of women. So pregnant women smokers, pregnant women who stopped smoking with e-cigarettes, those who stopped without e-cigarette, and non-smokers. Results. Very extremely, we see that those women who use e-cigarette, they are going to deliver children with a weight which is going to be equivalent to those babies born from non-smokers. We also see, and it's been the case for many years, we realize that smokers deliver children with a weight of at least 10% inferior to those non-smoker pregnant ladies, and we realize that those who continue to smoke and use an e-cigarette, they deliver children with an inferior weight, and this is because of carbon monoxide. So we need to help those pregnant women to stop smoking as early as possible, and potentially we should associate an e-cigarette, but also nicotine substitutes. So this is a double conclusion. The second conclusion to this study is that they demonstrate that there are more breastfeeding women amongst the non-smokers than amongst the smokers. Now, it's interesting to have a look at what they do elsewhere. And I'm going once again to congratulate the UK. They are the country where they have the lowest rate of tobacco use in Europe. So I think that it's a path that we should follow, and we should follow their recommendation. This is something that I've been doing for many years because they are highly pragmatic. So when they train healthcare professionals taking care of pregnant women, those healthcare professionals are properly trained. They explain that pregnant women can be helped with nicotine substitutes, but can also be trained with e-cigarettes without tar, without carbon monoxide, nor nicotine. In the meantime, in France, a number of bodies of which the National Council of Gynecologists have published papers in which it is stated it is not recommended to use an e-cigarette during pregnancy, and it is better to stop smoking during pregnancy. So I think that we should be extremely cautious. The fact that e-cigarettes is not recommended is such that gynecologists tend to discourage women to stop e-cigarette during pregnancy, and for that reason, pregnant women tend to take up smoking again, I mean regular smoking. I would like to encourage you to read this leaflet. It is available in English but also in French. This is an extremely interesting leaflet on the use of e-cigarettes during pregnancy. It is targeting healthcare professionals in contact with pregnant women during their pregnancy, obviously. Now, the last part of my presentation focuses on younger and teenagers, and I would like to thank Alex for the data he showed on the reduction of tobacco use by e-cigarettes. So he did not demonstrate that there's a tendency for those who are using e-cigarettes to then transition to the regular cigarettes. So it's more a competition than a bridge. This is a paper by Bertrand Lutzenberg. This is a systematic review and critical analysis of studies assessing the effect of e-cigarettes in adolescents. And we see that the most probable underlying mechanism is not so much a bridge, but rather, again, a competitive product. So e-cigarettes are more a competitive product to regular cigarettes than a bridge. It's a very interesting and seminal paper. The conclusion of this paper is the following. We all want adolescents to not use toxic products. Not using nicotine at all is the best option for teenagers and for the wide public as well. However, e-cigarettes, especially e-cigarettes, on the aromas that are used and the taxes that are paid, we need recommendations in both respects. But if there is too stringent regulations, and this is maybe, of course, a very negative impact on teenagers, but on the wide public as well. Something that picks up on something that Mr. BRISSOT mentioned is the US paper on US high schooler. And you see on that graph that there's an increase in the use of e-cigarettes, that's the red line. So vaping or vaping in 2018, 2019 is when the tool was marketed. And this was a source of concern for teenagers, but then it was short-lived. So there was, in that period of time, an increase in the use of e-cigarette. If it was a bridge to smoking, then we would see a parallel increase of smoke use in teenagers. However, what we see exactly the opposite. We still have a steep decrease of smoking while you have an increase of vaping. And you see that the percentage of smoker does decrease, and you see that in our US counterparts, the rate of smokers is very low, especially in high schoolers. This is an example in New Zealand, extremely interesting. In New Zealand, they were strictly against e-cigarette. They have a very aggressive policy against smoking. And you see that in teenagers, the rate of smoker is very low, and we could be envious of this rate. However, there's a decrease, but also a stagnation of smoke use in teenagers. However, there was a change in policies. A change of policy where e-cigarette was recognized as a potential help to tobacco cessation. And when these policies change, you can see that there's a drastic change, something that we had not seen since 2018. So there's a drastic decrease in teenager use of tobacco. So I think it's an avenue and it's food for thought. So by means of conclusion, I would say that e-cigarettes does help all smokers. It does help all of them to stop smoking if first-line treatment is not efficient, and also useful for those who are not going to resort to a healthcare professional. Also, e-cigarettes is of interest for pregnant women. We should stop being counterproductive, and we should help all pregnant women continue and abstain smoking. If they stopped smoking before they became pregnant, we should help them not to take up cigarettes, because it's of course very deleterious for the pregnant woman, but also for the unborn child. We saw the impact on teenagers. This is the case in France, but also internationally in the last 2 slides that I showed you. At the end of the day, we realize that a number of misinformation is circulating. There are many aromas that are added to those e-cigarettes, and they do increase the risk of those users to take up cigarettes again, and it's deleterious for our fight against tobacco use. And so I would like to continue and say that we need to continue with a close-knit follow-up. We need to continue research. We need to continue and inform our patients on what we know. Of course, we have less follow-up on e-cigarettes. We have a lot more follow-up for cigarettes, but we know that there are deleterious substances in cigarettes, but also in e-cigarettes. And we know that e-cigarettes is a risk reduction tools, and it's something that is confirmed because we've been using it for many years. Thank you very much, Marion. Now, after Marion's presentation, I would now like to give the floor to a colleague of ours, and you are going to be the one speaking against e-cigarettes. So are you still against e-cigarettes? Now, I'm slightly provocative here, but I know this is not the case. So the floor now is to Anne-Laurence Lefebvre. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Anne-Laurence Lefebvre. I'm specialist in addictology in the hospital, and I'm the president of the French-speaking Association on Tobaccology. Thank you very much for your kind invitation. Thank you very much to the 2 previous speakers. And I'm going to try, thank you to the 3 previous speakers. And I'm going to try and summarize the different information that they shared. Risk reduction is one of the first concepts that we have to deal with. When you use an e-cigarette and when you use a product which contains nicotine, and we compare e-cigarettes and regular cigarettes, well, we know all the impacts on morbidity, mortality. It was studied since the 1950s because there were a number of studies conducted by UK GPs. They have observed their own health, and so we have very nice follow-up curves on the health of UK GP, and we have the same sort of studies on US nurses. So thanks to those studies, we know that smoking comes with dramatic consequences. Risk reduction, intuitively, would be to think, well, we need to use a product with less risks, and we're going to draft a public health policy in order to try and recommend that product which comes with less risks. Now, that's a good idea, but we need to look at data that we have in that respect, because we start from the prerequisite that products with toxic, we're going to replace cigarettes with all the toxic products that we have are going to be replaced by an e-cigarette. You know that in France, we have 32% of smokers. From an epidemiological point of view, it's pretty much catastrophic. Bulgaria, Greece, Croatia, and then France comes fourth in terms of tobacco use prevalence. So we have many smokers, about 60% of which would like to stop tobacco use. So we have a number of challenges that we have to take up, and as Alex BRISSOT said, there are a number of social inequalities inequalities, they start from a very young age, and we see that in young teenagers, there's a high prevalence of tobacco use in those that left school, those that are apprentices, those that are on the job. And of course, we see that if you compare that with those students in high school in the best classes, the prevalence of smoking is a lot less. So same applies to number of countries. Those from less privileged backgrounds, those with less education have a higher prevalence of smoking. Now, we would like those users of e-cigarettes. So when I'm talking here, I'm talking on behalf of French-speaking association, the High Health Authority, the High Council to Public Health. Well, all of us, we'd like those people to stop smoking. But this is not what's happening. If you have a look at the ESCAPAD study 2022, and I will stand corrected by Alex Brissot if needed, but in this study, they say that we have 55% of e-cigarette users who also smoke. The past study, an American study, show that we have a problem in teenagers. We see an exacerbation in asthma flares in those teenagers who at the same time use an e-cigarette and also smoke. So 55%, so in the US, 55% who smoke and vape at the same time. 2022, we have a barometer in France, adult population aged between 18 and 75. So you know that you have a number of smokers. Smokers, you know, at the age of 60 already have an increased risk of mortality. And so this is an epidemiological phenomenon which is well known. So in adults, we have the same situation in our French barometer. We have 55% of smokers also vaping. So all the bodies that I have also mentioned, and also the healthcare professionals, because in the addictology industry, we have another of health professional. You see patients with a number of comorbidity, psychosocial challenges, and so they have a hard time stopping, and we have a hard time get them to switch 100% from smoking to e-cigarettes. And so if I were to be the devil's advocate, we may say that, well, it's true that there are less toxic substances in e-cigarettes. However, at the Pasteur Institute, we have a number of studies that have been published. They're extremely interesting. And in those studies, they do demonstrate that there are different toxicity levels. Of course, regular cigarettes rank first, but e-cigarettes come second. And what's better is certainly not to smoke at all. And heated tobacco ranks certainly somewhere in between regular cigarettes and e-cigarettes. So of course, there's always a part of risk in life, but a number of studies, and especially in the US, especially studies by Données, are interesting. What they say in those American studies is that in lung patients, if they stop smoking, they're going to see a steep improvement. If they partially stop but still smoke a couple of cigarettes, they do have a benefit. So this we can state for lung patients. However, for heart patients, there's an impact on the heart endothelium. There's also oxidative stress. So we cannot state that reduction of substance does not come with the same positive impact on the heart system. So those are all the international studies that I would like to mention. Now then again, the High Council of Public Health states, well, there are many products, many aromas in those e-cigarettes. Literature, as Marion ADLER said, we went through data in teenagers. And in France, we have a study named ESCAPAD, and we had those cross-cutting data. Those are not cohorts that we follow up for many years. So one study was performed with data from OFDT, with OFDT teams, and they do not demonstrate a bridge between both worlds, and so no risk to the use of e-cigarettes. However, what we see is that we have non-smokers using e-cigarettes. So please correct me if I'm wrong, but we go from 25% of e-cigarette users to 10% of cigarette users. NASEM in the United States, they demonstrated that you have people, they do not smoke. If they use e-cigarettes, they are 3 times more susceptible to become smokers at some point in life. So we have to be very cautious when we try to find the why and the how. Of course, we have epidemiological studies, but it's very difficult to be 100% certain that something that is devoid of risks. Observational studies on e-cigarettes often demonstrate that there's a higher risk of relapse, i.e. a higher risk of former smokers to take up smoking again. So again, the High Council on Public Health in France states the following: yes, e-cigarettes are efficient. Are they sufficiently efficient? Well, we don't know. The randomized control studies have only been carried out on 4,000 individuals worldwide. And again, we have the Cochrane meta-analysis 2023, and it demonstrates that e-cigarette is better than any other tobacco cessation use. However, we see that the confidence interval is very large because a cohort of only 4,000 people is just too small. For nicotine substitutes and drug, the cohorts were a lot larger, tens of thousands of individuals. So of course we need more research. If we pull all data together, we do see some studies that points towards superiority, other points towards superiority, and others don't. So potentially, if you pull everything together, you have some efficiency. But then again, the studies that come from a randomized control study is not always a reflection of general population. So that my main message is, in France, we have a number of individuals who smoke and vape. It seems that those come with a higher risk or have a higher risk than pure smokers. There are many things that we don't know. We need to confirm a number of things. We have a number of observational studies where those individuals declare many side effects. But the only problem in France is the high prevalence of smoking plus the high prevalence of those who smoke and use e-cigarettes at the same time. Last thing I wanted to say, what I think is important in pregnant ladies. Peter Hyatt designed a randomized control study where he demonstrated that e-cigarettes made it possible for those persons to stop smoking at 1 year versus 10% for those who used a nicotine substitute. But then he organized a different study, and it's a different study from what presented from Marion. And so it was a study designed in 25 centers in the UK. And we know that in the UK, they smoke less. But in that second study, he showed a center in Scotland, pregnant women that would receive by post their treatment. And we had winning rates of 6.6% at the end of pregnancy with e-cigarette and only 4.4 with nicotine substitute. So here the difference, it's not significant. So we need to have a look at a number of health determinants. We have to look at a number of other factors. So we do cite the UK, we do cite the US, but their policy against smoking is 25 years in advance compared to the one we have in France. In 2011, they already had a lot less smokers than we have. So the conclusion of this lengthy presentation is that our policy requires general measures. And so we may very well think that someone purchasing an e-cigarette may be able to stop smoking thanks to the e-cigarette. And so they stop, and that's very well, and that's very good for their health. The earlier, the better. They will have more benefits. However, they need something else, and we need something else so that we have less smokers. So we need a general policy against tobacco, and that's very important. And that policy against tobacco use has many prongs. And what I wanted to say in a nutshell, because it's rather funny, is that in the UK, in literature, they are cited, well, or rather, there's a debate between New Zealand and the UK. And you say that, well, e-cigarette comes with little risk or with no risk at all. Well, there's always a part of risk. And what they state is that prevalence has been reduced. We still have categories with which we have problems. People from less well-off backgrounds, individuals in prison, persons with co-addictions, well, you know that. And for those, we are conducting randomized controlled trials, we are conducting studies, and this is also the conclusion of the French Eye Health Institute. So for our population, I don't see the interest of trying to create a buzz, but we need to be more efficient for public health in general. Nicolas, if you agree, we're going to give the floor to our American counterpart, Professor Montoya, is going to give us his feedback, the American experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation to present. Yeah, this is a very difficult discussion, but I think there are several items that are important to keep in mind. First of all, I think we cannot confuse nicotine dependence with tobacco dependence. Those are two different things. So tobacco includes all the products of tobacco, and nicotine is just nicotine. What has been described is that the addiction to tobacco products or to electronic cigarettes are very much depending on the nicotine component of both. So one of the discussions, and this is a discussion that has been going on for a long time in the US, and especially in my division that supports research looking at treatments for substance use disorders. The discussion is, can we indicate an e-cigarette for the treatment of tobacco or tobacco dependence? And so the answer is, well, we don't know because we don't have the data. Why don't we have the data? Well, one, because there are no well-conducted randomized clinical trials, head-to-head comparisons looking at tobacco, less smoking versus e-cigarettes. There are no studies well conducted. So because of that limitation, we decided to embark ourselves in developing a standardized research electronic cigarette. The acronym is SHREC, not like the movie, but it's SHREC without H. So this electronic cigarette, we were trying to test it to help people, hopefully as a harm reduction method, to help people to stop smoking. And the first obstacle that we found was that in the United States, tobacco products are regulated by the FDA, but a different part of the FDA that is not the part that regulates medications. The medications are regulated by the Center for Drug Research and Evaluation, CDER, This is a different center. It's the Center for Tobacco Products. And we found that in order to be able to conduct those double-blind, placebo-controlled, well-randomized studies, we had to have an equivalent of what it is used for medications, which is for medications, we have to file an investigational new drug application, or IND, with the FDA in order to be able to test a new medication in humans. Well, there was no equivalent for tobacco products. So the first step that the FDA had to do was to regulate and define the guidelines on how to develop what it is now called an investigational tobacco product, or ITP. So this took a long time, because to create the guidelines to file an ITP, you have to have also a drug master file. So you have to know the chemistry, and you have to have all the compounds. So this has taken a long time, and it's been probably 8 years that we have been in this process. The good news is that we already have, the SREC is already available. You can find in the NIDA website, if you Google standardized research e-cigarettes, you can find the description of the e-cigarettes, and you can also find how to obtain those cigarettes. Those cigarettes are distributed for free by my division at NIDA. So any investigator from any part of the world can request e-cigarettes, the standardized e-cigarette, for research purposes. Now, this is all really nice, and we are at this point. However, as you probably know, e-cigarettes, and we saw the data, became fashionable. They became, and for many reasons, and in large part because tobacco smoking was banned, especially in the United States, in all the restaurants and all public places. So it was becoming almost impossible for people to smoke cigarettes. So then an alternative was the e-cigarette. It was, of course, very easy to just lit the e-cigarette and vape basically anywhere. Then, of course, they were banned in airplanes, and then they have been banned in more and more places. But the sales of e-cigarettes were like up to the roof. It was a great business. And of course, tobacco companies, being tobacco companies, they saw an opportunity to sell a product that it was being penetrating the market and being widely accepted. So now the problem that we have is that right now, well, the product that we developed was in collaboration with Enjoy, one of the e-cigarette companies, and now Enjoy is part of one of the big tobacco companies. So it is now the dilemma that we have is more an ethical dilemma about supporting research with e-cigarettes, when we know that there are companies behind that are trying to boost the sales of those e-cigarettes. So that is an ethical issue that at least we at NIDA, we have decided that investigators who receive funds from tobacco companies are basically discouraged from applying to research to NIDA. It's not that is forbidden, but is not encouraged. So people are instructed, and it's all in the NIDA website, that if you receive money, if you're an investigator and receive money from tobacco companies, then it is more difficult to obtain funds and to obtain support from NIDA. So the issue that we have right now is, as I said, that the SREC, it was in collaboration with Enjoy when it was a small company. Now we have this problem that the SREC is now part of, or the Enjoy is now part of the large tobacco company. But we still have the SREC available for investigators, and it's a product that is being developed by us. Now, the question is also, what is the recommendation? So first of all, I think, although we heard very good science, very interesting data. At the end is like the gold standard to provide recommendations about a treatment is a double-blind placebo-controlled trial, and we don't have that. So then it is not possible to make any recommendations in terms of is it better or is not better. What we know and is clearly demonstrated is that it is that the risk of smoking tobacco is higher than the risk of vaping. So vaping is apparently, based on the reports, is less harmful. However, the question is also if we make an analogy to alcohol, and we have a patient with an alcohol use disorder, and that patient is dependent on vodka, for example, do we recommend to that patient to use wine instead of vodka? So that I don't think there's, I mean, and Carl Mann is here, an expert in alcohol. I don't know if there has been any research looking at if people switch from vodka to wine, if there is, if it's better or if it's not better. In my opinion, both have alcohol, and it's the same thing with tobacco and with e-cigarette. Both have nicotine. Nicotine, as I said at the beginning of my intervention, is that is the root cause of the addiction to either tobacco or to e-cigarette. So the question about what is less harmful is a question that is relatively easy to answer. But the question about should by switching from tobacco to vaping, patients will do better, patients will have better outcomes, patients will have an opportunity to reduce or stop using nicotine. That's a question that remains unanswered. The complication of all this is the fact that also the statistics have shown that very, very few people who vape only, especially for those who transition from smoking tobacco to vaping, very few vape only, about 50%. So of them just vape. So all the other 50% are still smoking. So it means that it's not the panacea, is not what is going to be helping most people. And as I said, there's still people are going to be addicted to nicotine at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicolas, merci beaucoup pour l'ensemble de ces informations. Je pense qu'on va...
Thank you for all these presentations. We're going to give you the floor to have an exchange. I would like to ask you a few questions. First of all, Alex BRISSOT, are you still with us? You have data about prevalence. There is a risk factor depending on the social professional situation, which is very interesting because it relates to other risk factors with other drugs, the social status, access to products. There's also the idea that among young people at the age of 17, they're less nicotine consumers, cigarettes, e-cigarettes, and within these consumers, there is an increase of e-cigarette because it's easily accessible and it's available, readily available. And I think this is a success. There is a decrease of tobacco at age 17. And this is a success for public policy. The second thing is that the data from Marion ADLER, this science is a basis for work. Maybe it's not. Maybe we don't have enough robust data. Maybe tonight we're missing a researcher in social sciences that could tell us about the nicotine consumption and drugs in general. And the third point in terms of risk reduction, we have been actors in risk reduction for a long time. We based on immediate proofs, and we built systems without waiting for data that came much later of longitudinal investigations. And in the emergency of HIV, we couldn't use. And tobacco-induced cancer, for instance, we need urgent answers. Especially in France. The fourth point is data, different data, health data that are access to products, data of behaviors are very different depending on the products. In New Zealand, England, in the US, it's all very different because access is different, because the weight of lobbies is different, because public policies of access to nicotine treatment and other actions toward tobacco reduction are different. They're studied a long time ago in the US, but later in France. So it's difficult to look at what happens in other countries, because in France, access to e-cigarettes, as Marion said, we have AFNOR, we have standards, we have to follow French standards, which are to improve quality. The fifth point is access to information. The data of the cancer barometer, maybe you saw that when we talk about the vaping, we talk among us, okay, it's nice, we can go towards smoking tobacco cessation, but 3/4 of people in France think that that vaping is worse than tobacco smoking. People think that e-cigarettes can lead to cancer, that the nicotine is worse than in e-cigarettes. So we need to disseminate information, and this is missing for us to disseminate the information among the public. The last point in the debate is finally we want to. It's hard to look only at the e-cigarette product without thinking of a wider policy to communicate at a very early age, and access to products, a better control of access to products with tax policies and access to a large range of products. And as Marion said, is when you offer a wide range of products to drug consumers, or a wide range of tools to stop consuming, people take advantage of it. And this is good for health promotion, and vaping help consumers take care of their health. This is what I wanted to share with you. Now I propose to react, and then we kind of exchange with the audience. I think it's interesting for the audience. Very shortly, Nicolas, you said very important things. This is real life. People must be able to stop smoking with pleasure. If we do studies, first of all, we shouldn't give information where the public will feel that vaping is worse than smoking, which is wrong. People think that people think. I asked students, medical students, 50% said that nicotine leads to cancer, and we know it is not. So this is very serious. And the studies you do, that's very interesting. But what's important is to see that if you give always the same standardized vaporizer, e-cigarettes is not the most efficient help. As if you said you do a scientific study on crutches and you give the same crutch to someone who is very tall or very short. So the patient, we see that in real life with our patient. I've seen that for 10 years. We must adapt the e-cigarettes to the patient. He must have a choice of taste. We have to keep the aromas. He must have a choice of the amount of nicotine, so that he must have pleasure in getting in smoking cessation. Thank you very much for your presentations. It's these answers on the cancer barometer is not surprising. It has to do with tobacco treatment or alcohol treatment. Some people will say, oh, it's awful, I'm going to have adverse effects. So nicotine is something that is, people know that it's a dangerous product. So they draw a parallel. So I don't think there is a problem, a market problem. The market of the e-cigarette in France is about 1 billion euros. In the US, there is the US, Great Britain, and then France. So it's not a market concern. What worries me, and your company that was Enjoy, that was purchased by the tobacco industry, and the tobacco industry is now taking over the e-cigarette, and we have the feeling that we have a very toxic product. And now the tobacco industry, now we're not the bad guys anymore. We're going to be the good guys. Now we're going to sell clean nicotine. And they're about to become a pharmaceutical industry. So the tobacco industry always had a very dangerous talk. And I think this should be taken into account. We must help our patients. In favor, I think that an independent e-cigarette company could develop a pharmaceutical e-cigarette. It won't have all the characteristics that Marion would like to have. The aromas, the flavors, but we're also in a desire to. We want to have something appealing, like puffs for young people with very high nicotine concentration. So it's always a complicated choice, but I'm really in favor for an independent industry to develop a drug. It would be an excellent oral substitute. Thank you, Laurence. Then I would like to ask you about 3 puff, snus, heated tobacco. What is your feeling about the products and the ban? Heated tobacco is tobacco. It contains tobacco. It's a pyrolysis. It's the same as a cigarette. Instead of lighting it with a flame, it burns. There are the same substances in the retrouilleur studies. We realize that they are the same substances, even if it's slightly less. So it leads to the same disorders. Even if the lung cancer is. Snus, it's an electronic cigarette. It has nothing to do. Snus, it's an no. So it's a chew tobacco. Snus, it's a small bag with tobacco. It's still tobacco, but there is no burning, no combustion. The Swedes use it, and they have the lowest lung cancer rate in Europe. So clearly, it eliminates some risks such as lung cancer. It contains some tobacco substances that are carcinogenic, but it doesn't have the same risk as heated tobacco. There are no contact injuries in the jaws. Yes. Yes, you can have a cancer, mouth, if you, but clearly, but it's still tobacco. Puff is an e-cigarette, nothing to do with tobacco. There is no tobacco, no combustion, is vaporization of nicotine. The negative element is that it's polluting. They are throwaway batteries, so it's going to pollute the environment, and it's a disaster for the environment. What's very bad is that they focus on young people. Many people think that puff is as dangerous as cigarettes. No, it's an e-cigarette that helps patients to get out of tobacco with pleasant flavors, and it helps people not to get into tobacco smoking when they use that in parties. However, it can also be an initiation for young people that didn't intend to consume tobacco or to vape. If they don't have an intention, they're not going to do it. They're not going to use puffs. But if there is some marketing, some will use it. Then we would see that in France. We would see an increase of tobacco smoking, which is not the case. So it's a competitor, and a very good competitor, because it appeals to young people. What's bad about puffs is that it's marketed towards young people, and I'm against that. But it's a competitor. Anne-Laurence, what do you think about the three products? Tobacco, it's like it gives it's burnt, so it gives toxic products. At the Pasteur Institute in Lille, maybe there are less toxic products, but it still contains, it's still toxic because of combustion. Puffs, it's I think 13% of children from 9 to 13 used it. And nicotine addiction, this clean nicotine market is a market. People are looking for more and more customers, so I'm not in favor of it. You want to talk about it? Mr. Montoya, you want to talk about those three products? I think there should be a microphone in the audience. Who wants to ask a question? Please introduce yourself. Mr. Levobici, please introduce yourself. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Bertrand Lebovici. I'm an addictologist. I would like to talk about alcohol. I think that we have the answer on vodka and wine. It's a question of quantity and of alcohol concentration. Let's assume that wine is 10 degrees and vodka is 40. If you drink 4 times more wine, that vodka is equivalent. But I think that in terms of risk reduction, it's better to drink 1 liter of red wine than 1 liter of vodka. I think there is no mystery on that. Concerning the e-cigarette, I'm convinced about the risk reduction dimension of vaping. I worked in the coordination unit in tobacology of the Paul Bruce Hospital, managed by Amine BENYAMINA, and I heard Patrick Dupont, who was, it was very complex. I didn't know what I could believe or not, but the people did not agree, and I continue to think e-cigarette is an excellent tool for risk reduction. And risk reduction doesn't mean that there are no risk whatsoever. I don't know about the figure of 95% that Marion ADLER said about the difference of harmfulness between a cigarette and vape and e-cigarette, but it's valid. I think that there is no more to say. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Gavin Bart. I'm from
Je m'appelle Gavin Bart.
in the United States. Thank you. I think the choices that this debate have provided are false choices in the sense that both can be true, where there is the potential for harm reduction as well as gateway. For historical reasons and economic reasons, cigarettes may contain 12 to 15 milligrams of nicotine, and the way they are packaged, people pretty much get a consistent dose, and it's not mysterious that people may be exposed to about 200 milligrams over the course of a day. When they use their e-cigarette, they self-titrate the amount of nicotine to that, and therefore there is the harm reduction that's being mentioned. They get their nicotine without all of the ill effects of tobacco. In adolescents who do not yet have any nicotine tolerance, there is not the same dose relationship, and the way e-cigarettes are packaged and the amounts of dose an adolescent can consume, especially because now they can do it in school and at home, situations they could not have done before because of the odor of cigarettes would have made their parents or teachers discover them. They're being exposed to far greater doses of nicotine than ever before historically. It's not clear that we know what the impact of that is on the adolescent brain and what the dangers that may cause. And I'd be interested in our panelists' response, and if, especially from Alex BRISSOT, if there are any data about nicotine dose exposure as opposed to simply e-cigarette, yes or no? Do we know the amount of nicotine being consumed? Thank you.
Thank you. D'autres réactions? Il y a une main qui se lève ici.
Other reactions? I think that the debate, I'm a general practitioner in Brussels. I think that the debate is well balanced and interesting, but something strikes me in the tobacco. In France, by increasing the price of cigarettes, you decrease consumption. There is a traffic between Belgium and France, and less. And there is less tobacco addiction in Belgium than in France. So things, I said, truth, what is given as truth is wrong. I didn't know there were so many smokers in France. Miguel Velexa, I think the increase of the price of cigarettes they just created a prohibition, but with the same consequences, illegal trafficking and no more control on the quality of products sold, like with drugs, illegal drugs. I think it's not a good idea because it gives way to traffic and the disturbances on the in DL centers, and I think it's not a good idea to do that to do a prohibition by price.
Merci. D'autres réactions? Oui, il y a une main qui se
Thank
lève.
you. Are there other comments from the public? Good evening. My name is Natalie. I'm a medical doctor in Pau, specialized in addictions. And I would like to pick up on the comparisons you made between the abstinence rate at 1 year with patches compared to vaping. And if I'm not mistaken, those products should not be opposed, but are rather complementary. Patches are here to help reduce addiction because they are addictolytic, i.e. they reduce craving, and e-cigarettes helps in behavioral dependency, the gesture that you miss and that you need to win. And of course, maybe it maintains addiction because you may have craving for your e-cigarette. However, I think it's a combination of actions that could be beneficial in order to foster more sustainable abstinence. Also, I would like to bring a more personal testimonial. As a former smoker, I'm an anecdologist. I tried 50 times. I failed 50 times. And I was able to remain abstinent for the last 2 years, thanks to the following approach. For many years, I only used patches, plus chewing gums, and I would go into relapse after a couple of weeks. And then I decided to use an e-cigarette, initially associated to nicotine substitute patches. Then I stopped those patches, and that's the only sustainable experience which made it possible for me to be abstinent. However, I'm addicted to my e-cigarette now. And it's impossible for me the thought of not knowing where my cigarette is probably more panic provoking than when I lost my pack of cigarettes. So I'm dependent on my e-cigarette, but I no longer have the deleterious impact or effects of tobacco. Of course, there are 5% of toxic effects, we know, that may be comparable to tobacco use, only in 5%. But I wanted really to explain and state that it was a major change for me as a former smoker, and the experience was pleasurable. And that's the changing and the turning point. You know, in the past, when I tried, and every time I failed, if I were to decide between an e-cigarette or a regular cigarette, you know, at a party, when someone proposes a cigarette, it's no longer an effort for me to refuse a regular cigarette because I prefer my e-cigarette. So in my department, I also organize a workshop on addictology, and I always propose this testimonial on my own experience. And at the end of this workshop, we have at least 1/3 of the attendees who are interested in maybe trying with an e-cigarette. So thank you very much for sharing this. We're going to try and both answer questions, but also listen to testimonials. So maybe we would like your take on that. Maybe you'd like to let us know. And also the question on nicotine and craving of e-cigarettes. So first, congratulations for tobacco cessation. And I have a number of my patients with a journey similar to yours. It is possible to become less dependent on e-cigarettes when you're on the safe side when it comes to not being at risk, resuming smoking. And of course, this is a journey. and I try to follow up on all of our patients, and I give them tips and tricks so that they do not have a hard time becoming dependent on e-cigarette. So I explained that the e-cigarette should not be used in places where they would not have smoked in the first place. So not to become accustomed to using the e-cigarette anywhere and everywhere. Importantly, association of an e-cigarette plus nicotine substitute is a recipe that I use. So patches, but also gums, inhalation devices, any tool that may help. And everything is at the disposal of my patients. Again, it has to do with what is pleasurable to them, and they know better than we do. Now, as you know, I had a rather lengthy experience in tobacco cessation, and so I'm going to try and address Gavin's part, and I'm very happy to see you here, and I read many of your papers, so thank you very much for being here, first and foremost. So dependency on e-cigarette is a lot easier to remove than dependency to regular cigarettes. And many of my patients, when they quit thanks to e-cigarettes, they become more and more accustomed to leaving e-cigarettes at home rather than their pack of cigarettes. When they used to be smokers, they would have a pack of cigarettes and they would have the same amount of nicotine on a daily basis because nicotine is highly addictive because of the inhaled share of nicotine. When they exit the period of time where there's a risk of relapse, so when they're out of that mood, so to speak, it's a lot easier to stop e-cigarette because it has to do with behaviors as well. You say that the nicotine rate is higher. I do not necessarily agree. Of course, there's inhalation of nicotine, but it's completely different when you inhale very strongly on a cigarette or if you don't. So the doses of nicotine is going to be different depending on the way you smoke. In an e-cigarette, of course, what you inhale really depends on what you put inside, but also on the way you use your e-cigarette. So I always start with recommendations, and I explain to my patients how to use the e-cigarette in order not to be too dependent, even if, of course, they become dependent. Now, if what you said was true, it would be, again, an increase in tobacco use in teenagers, while what we see is that when they start e-cigarettes, they use less regular cigarettes. We know that some are going to start an e-cigarette and then eventually they're going to smoke regular cigarettes. But again, it should not be a substance of abuse in any case. Well, thank you very much. Your question on the consequences of a strong concentration of nicotine all day long, also in class, with e-cigarettes that you can use anywhere, plus the fact that it's very discreet. Well, we don't know much about that. We do not know the consequences on the brain of those teenagers. And it's a worthwhile question. And for the time being, I think we can address. I have a question on, well, 95% less risk. Well, it's a paper published in European Addiction Research, and it was a consensus paper. So a few researchers agree in a consensus paper on statements: dangers versus benefits, risks of e-cigarettes. And so we had 12 individuals, and so they use the Delphi method. So it's a consensus method, and they reached said consensus, and this is where I extracted my 95% less risks. Now, this being said, there are less toxic substances. However, we need to assess the consequences on health. And it's true that there are papers out there which say that there are consequences on health. And classically, cardiologists will tell you, well, it's nice if you stop smoking, use an e-cigarette, stop smoking, use an e-cigarette, then stop the e-cigarette. However, if you have a cardiovascular disorders, for example, coronary disorder, a stroke, please do not use the e-cigarette. Because do not use the e-cigarette because it's going to change the vascular endothelium. There are substances that are inflammatory, as in any inhaled device. So that's pretty straightforward, and that's all, unfortunately, that I can add to this debate. So I would like to give the floor to Nicolas Bonnet, to what Mr. Velasquez just said about our tax policy. It's true that in France, we have a comprehensive system through taxes in order to have a generation who is tobacco free. So what would you have to say about this? What do you think about the different arguments? Do you think that the policy is worthwhile or not? Well, a number of things. Prohibition is certainly not the best answer. When you're addicted to a substance, we know that very well. It's not because it's more expensive, but people are going to stop craving for a product. However, what we know on tobacco, we gave example, the US, UK, New Zealand, those are countries where the tax policy is very high. The price of cigarettes is very high. And what sciences show is that when you increase the price by 20%, you reduce consumption by 10%. So that's very straightforward. But this tax policy should be included in a more comprehensive prevention policy. And of course, there should be a good access to nicotine substitutes. You should also have training, information, potential payment of some substitutes by the state health insurance, and also signage, which explains where you can use your e-cigarette and where you cannot use your e-cigarette. So a tax policy, a strong tax policy, of course, should be integrated, and there you have a domino effect. So as I said, increase of price of 20% translates in a reduction of consumption by 10%. So you can keep the microphone, but then we shall give the floor to Yvan. Now, as you said, you need to have a tax policy, but the environment need to be consistent. Our friend from Belgium is very relevant because we need probably to have more harmony in between the different countries. We have questions, at the border. That in Spain, tobacco is less expensive. In Belgium, I have a hard time understanding. Is tobacco more expensive in Belgium? More expensive or less expensive? Okay, less expensive. So it's an enigma. So in Spain, they explain that tobacco is less expensive, and in Belgium, it's more expensive, and yet people are less smokers. So, and in Spain, they smoke less than we do in France. Okay, so those situations, again, each country is different. Prevention policies are different. The policy is more or less comprehensive. In France, it's true that the tax policy is very stringent, but also we have institutes where they manipulate figures, and we are led to think that there's a lot of trans-border purchases. And yet a number of studies have demonstrated that there are not as many trans-border purchases as we would like to think. So, for example, here we're close to Spain, so it's true that there's a high percentage of cross-border sales, and same applies to Belgium and close to Belgium. However, the impact on tobacco consumption, it's not only related directly to that price. So, of course, there are contradictory figures, and we need to take those figures with a pinch of salt. Now, in some countries, cigarettes are less expensive. We have cited those countries, and yet the prevalence is lower than it is here in France. Hence the need for strong governance. Yvan, you have the floor.
I only have a couple of comments. One, nicotine is nicotine. So there's no one stronger nicotine than another. All nicotines are the same. What we have is different concentrations of nicotine in different products. Cigarettes have some concentration, and vaping has a different concentration. I think that's an important concept, because the concept that the nicotine in e-cigarette is less addictive is not the case. It's the same. I think the comment that Gavin made about the different populations is very important to keep in mind, because we cannot make blanket statements about e-cigarettes without keeping in mind the type of population that we are talking about. So, and we know that, like, some of the statements about the promotion of e-cigarettes have gone through adolescents who have not had previous exposure to nicotine, and they are becoming addicted to e-cigarette. And we see that right now in surveys from schools are showing that adolescents are vaping more than smoking cigarettes. So we have to be careful about the recommendation, and we have to differentiate a population that has been exposed versus a population that has not been exposed to nicotine. Just the final, I mean, I think the idea of the reduction of risk is a very good idea, but I also think that it has many risks. It's a reduction of risk, and we know also from many other areas in the addiction field that sometimes reduction and risk can bring other risks and may not be as much reduction as we anticipated.
Thank you. Tu voulais dire un mot?
Oui, alors juste un mot.
Right. You're right. You're right. What you say is right. We should avoid, in any case, when teenagers start anything at all. I'm not in favor of nicotine in young people. But what I would recommend is avoid them to start smoking in the first place, because when they start smoking as a teenager, they will become dependent for potentially a decade. And so we need to have a healthcare policy that is such that teenagers start with nothing at all. And you're better in the United States than we are, and they are better in the UK, and they are better in New Zealand as well. What I would like to say is that we should not be naive. We need to understand, and they need to understand, so as to reduce risks. A few years ago, I remember that I would treat patients after they had a stroke. And I'm sure that I'm not going to agree with Anne-Laurence. We all work at the board of the French-speaking Tobacology Association. I know that we don't agree, and yet we're still colleagues. What I'm going to state is going to be controversial, but a few years ago, when I would treat patients that just had a stroke, we would tell those people, you just had a stroke, don't use nicotine because it's going to be inflammatory in the endothelial tissues. And so we would tell them, do not use an e-cigarette. And those would resume smoking. Well, I would say to those patients, stop smoking because regular smoke is very deleterious to your heart. Now, a few years later, we realized that this advice was not potentially the best advice for them. Also, when we have a patient, they have asthma and they have a heart condition. If they use propylene glycol that is included in an e-cigarette, they're not necessarily going to increase the risk of heart disease. Now, of course, any inhaled product is bad for their breath in general and for their lungs. And if the nicotine substitute patches are not sufficient, of course, we should use e-cigarette in order to stop smoking in the first place. Alex Brissot, I think you're still here. No, well, I'm still here. So I'm sure that you listened to the entire debate. Yes, I have a few comments. So the floor is yours. And thank you again for your presentation. Yes, well, I'm still here. and I wanted to talk about the tobacco consumption at 17 years of age. It's true that we have 15% of teenagers aged 17, they use tobacco on a daily basis in 2022. But we need to compare that with previous years. For example, in the year 2000, it was 40%, 40. They used tobacco on a daily basis. Then slowly it decreased. In 2010, it was 25%. And in the last years, we have had a steep decrease from 25 to 15%. So 10 points less at the age of 17. And how do you explain that? Well, maybe the public policies implemented in the last years. Also, the COVID crisis has to be factored in, and maybe it had an impact on teenagers' consumption. Do you think there's a correlation with price? The increase in price? Well, this is not something that we've looked into because it's something that, you know, was discussed. We want to have this zero tobacco generation. Well, you're right. And also I wanted to pick up on a question by someone in the public. We conducted a research on where those teenagers get their cigarettes from. And so we work on this question on supply chain, so to speak, when you get your cigarettes from a neighboring country. So we're conducting research and there will be results in some time. Well, thank you very much. Do not go away. Yeah, there was something else I wanted to say. The last comment. I think someone was asking the following question on the quantity of nicotine in e-cigarettes. We do not have data on this, the quantity of nicotine that they use in their e-cigarettes. However, if we ask teenagers, if we ask them, do you know if there is nicotine in your e-cigarettes? Well, the answer is 1/3 say that they use products without nicotine, and 17% say that they have no idea what's in that product. We have 5 minutes left. We're going to try and make the most of them. Hello. Good evening. My name is Guillaume. I'm 18, and I'm going to give my point of view as a young person. On a daily basis, in my high school, I see that there's less and less use of regular cigarettes in favor of e-cigarettes. And this is my personal opinion in the light of what you just said. I think that there's teenagers are taking up e-cigarettes, and I think that on a daily basis it's positive, because if we take up e-cigarettes, then we don't take up cigarettes. So less tobacco use. And what the gentleman said online, as teenagers, we stop using cigarettes and e-cigarettes, not necessarily because of what we hear on a daily basis, but just because we realize that we have negative impacts from an economic point of view to begin with. Well, it comes with a cost, but also as the impact on our lifestyle. So those using e-cigarettes, did they smoke first? Well, a number of my friends, they started smoking first because of their own relatives, their parents, their posse, or because there was a snowball effect, they just wanted to belong, and so they started cigarettes, but then they stopped rather easily by switching to an e-cigarette. Are there young people around you who started straight away with an e-cigarette? Yes, I also have friends, they started directly. So they started with products without nicotine, but then they took up products with nicotine. And I have very few that started with e-cigarette and then they went to regular cigarettes. And I see that personally. You have more negative comments when you smoke than when you use an e-cigarette. When you're in the public space, if you smoke, it's people are going to be bothered by you smoking, and also the smell is bothersome to many. So I think that we have less consumption because also that they are changing in society. Thank you for your testimonial and congratulations. Manuel would like to talk. Okay, two more persons and then we stop. I'm specialized in addictology. I'm also a psychiatrist. When I listen to these debates, I'm under the impression that it's the same debate that we had when we were discussing methadone. Here we're talking about the smokers also using e-cigarettes, and 30 years ago we would discuss drug users also using methadone, and they would try methadone and they couldn't quit drugs. And then we had this debate, oh, you're giving drugs to drug users. And then we said methadone, you know, those are opiates and it's not good. And then those people, many of them are still alive 30 years down the line. I mean, those using methadone and potentially other drugs. So what I'm trying to say here is that, you know, 20 years ago, we started using patches, and so you would wear a patch, but you would have to stop tobacco and you had to remove your, and back then, 20 years ago, we had patch users that was also smokers. And so those would have a hard time in tobacco cessation, and so they would choose tobacco. And so again, if we tell those guys that e-cigarettes are bad for them, then we'll never get them in our addiction sessions in the first place. Hello, I'm a psychiatrist specialized in addictology, and I also work in a ward with mothers and children. So I see mothers and children. And in the children that I see young girls, very young, with puffs that you don't find at your retailer. Those puffs they can buy in the department store or in the shop. They look like a bib for babies. And so the marketing is horrible, but it works on those very young girls. And when we talk about nicotine has a psychotropic effect, it's a psychostimulant as well. It's an antidepressant, anxiolytic, hence the success of nicotine, right? And you know, maybe you know the level of suffering of teenagers today and of female teenagers. They're in high suffering. And so when they get across a product which helps them relax and alleviate their pain, well, of course they use it. So we should talk about the psychotropic effect of nicotine. I'm in favor of e-cigarette, of course. And those young teenagers, when they are dependent on nicotine and when they crave nicotine when they are very young, those, and it's almost systematic, they always or almost always have a syndrome of attention disorder. Almost all of them have attention disorder, with or without hyperactivity. It's a good tool for diagnosis to date. If they are addicted to nicotine, more often than not, they have an attention disorder deficit. Half a second to Marion, because she didn't have an opportunity to talk much, and then Nicolas will make a conclusion. Okay, the comment that we had on this addictologist sitting at the back is very interesting, saying that the debate we're having is the same debate that we had 30 years ago, and I hope we are going to be better in the use of e-cigarettes in tobacco cessation. And then from a scientific point of view, those 95% that we mentioned is confirmed by a UK group of researchers. It's not a consensus statement of 12 researchers, it's a larger group. They also have qualitative studies, and so I think it's a data which is really strong. Nicolas? Well, thank you. 95% less toxic, well, an e-cigarette being 95% less toxic than a conventional cigarette. Well, the long and short of this, well, I think we said many things. I think it was a very interesting debate. We had a number of international points of view as well. But apparently, well, you know, the e-cigarette, with or without nicotine, is a source of a number of debates. There are a number of preconceptions. There are a number of subjects that have already been discussed when we had to substitute indeed drugs and methadone, etc. And so I think the question is access to nicotine in society. What place do we want to give to nicotine in society? Should it be on the mass market? Should it only be in pharmacies? And it's true that nicotine consumers, they are now used to increasing or reducing the quantity of nicotine that they have with e-cigarettes, with patches, etc. And I suppose that our role as addictologists is to help them and inform them and also provide them with scientific based information. So we have a lot of work to do in that respect. And I think that the debate that we had was very fruitful. So thank you very much, Alex, for your comments. I know it's late, but it was very important that we had this conversation, that we could state, that we could also talk about this general information. A few minutes ago, we talked about alcohol, and I think that the main difference between nicotine and alcohol is creates cancer in any form that you take, while nicotine, it's not the same. So I think we should have two different approaches for alcohol and nicotine. So thank you very much for this comment full of common sense. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you for hanging on to the bitter end. And thank you for the debate. Thank you to Alex Brissot. Yes, this is Alex and not Alexei once again. So thank you very much, Alex Brissot. Thank you for being here on Zoom. Thank you, Ivan. Thank you very much. Thank you, Anne-Laurence, Marion. Thank you, Nicolas, of course. Thank you